no worries about having your information out there. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk a little bit about ideologies. And, ideologies are strange because I think we're at a point now where people can have multiple ideologies from multiple different types of ideologies. So if we look at the screen here, this is our classic political spectrum, right? So we have, the left. We always hear the terms left and right. So we have, kind of the belief in a more communal society, or communism as people call it, or generally on the left. And then we have things like conservatism and libertarianism on the right. I think I mentioned in the video that it kind of bothers me a bit that libertarianism is considered a right-leaning ideology because, it basically takes views from a bunch of multiple ideologies and kind of combines it. All right, so when we talk about an ideology, usually that's going to be a package of beliefs that we have about ourselves, right? And one important thing about ideologies is political knowledge isn't part of your ideology. There's just things that are facts. Usually I could say facts aren't part of political ideologies. There's 100 members of the Senate. There is 435 members of the House of Representatives. Those are facts, right? Those usually don't coincide with your ideology. Opinion doesn't really qualify as part of an ideology. And political culture is another one where, how we're brought up and the area of country that we live in. I mean, you can even split it down to, if we talk about California, a person from California is a lot different than a person from Texas, obviously, because the culture is a little bit different as far as, maybe the gun, maybe the idea about, freedoms. Those are different throughout the country. And we can even kind of qualify that and say that there's differences throughout the state of California where somebody from Northern California is a lot different than somebody from Southern California. Just things like that. So depending on where we live, that's another thing. We talked about classic liberalism a bit. Classic liberalism is the John Locke theory that we're all entitled to life, liberty, and property. Right? And remember, it kind of coincides with what we've heard in the Declaration of Independence, where we are entitled to those, rights that were bestowed by the Creator, that we all are entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I think I mentioned before in another session that one of the things that was concerning about that was I think Jefferson left off, the right to property intentionally because remember back in the 1770s, 1780s, who was important at the time, who were part of the ruling elites, it was white men with property, right? So if you enfranchise everybody with property, then you don't have an elite system. I hope that makes sense. And I mean, I don't mean to talk down about what Jefferson did, but I do think they did intentionally change that from from property to pursuit of happiness. Does that make sense? And one thing about this whole classical liberalism is not get it confused with modern liberalism. Modern liberalism is what we see today. Classic liberalism is basically a system that focuses on individual liberty. We also have classical conservatism, Sir Edmund Burke. We'll get into a little bit more about that in a minute when we talk about modern conservatism, because there's really not that much difference. Socialism, the S word that everybody seems to be on the right seems to be concerned about. Basically, socialism is an economic system where everyone owns equal portions of the society, equal portions of the factors of production. Remember, factors of production and econ, if you guys haven't taken econ or don't need to take econ, basically that is, the factors of production are land, labor, and capital, right? And the government would own all of the factors of production that are out there. But think about this, guys. I got to get away from saying that. That's a habit of mine. I got to say people instead of guys. Someone took me to task for that one time, so I got to break that habit. What do you guys think? What do you guys know about us here in the United States having some socialist aspects? What would be examples of socialism that exist here in the United States right now? Not not what potentially could happen as far as like the Bernie Sanders type beliefs, but what do you think are some aspects of socialism that we have now? Remember, this is a left-leaning ideology. If you want to type in the chat or if you want to hop on the mic, either one is fine with me. What do you guys think? What are some aspects of socialism we have here in the United States? Obamacare is a good one, right? Obamacare makes a requirement for states to provide a kind of a place where they can purchase health insurance, and there's actually, if you qualify for it, there's some subsidies that you might get from the government for it. What else? What are some other ones? Social Security, is definitely one. Medicare is another one. Medicare, socialized medicine. We pay into it through our taxation. If you look at your paycheck, you'll see something that says FICA Med or FICA Social Security. Those are two taxes that we pay. We'll discuss those a little bit later in the summer and what those involve. But yeah, that's a good example of a socialist program. Some people might make the argument that our tax system is kind of a socialist, where a system where we work the whole year, then in January or February we get our W-2, then we file, and there's some instances that we may get money back. And where do you get that money from? It usually comes from the higher earners. So that might be an example of socialism. Definitely public education, public transportation, fire and police are good ones that we pay money out of our tax dollars and have these programs ran. There is, in my area here, there's a big kind of a scandal with the Sweetwater High School District and some of the misuse of public funds that have been happening. So yeah, I mean, obviously some of these things need oversight, and I think if you want to really look at a utopian society, socialism would be the goal. But I think we all have stuff, in our system that kind of is based off of that whole thought that socialism might be a better system. But I don't think we as a people can truly really embrace socialism here in the United States, because we all have different goals. And I always like to talk about kind of that, some of the advantages. One of Marx's criticisms of capitalism would be that workers are exploited. You put in money to an ownership of a company, and then you make a profit, and you don't share that profit with your workers. That was one of the criticisms of socialism. In the social, if we do embrace a socialist type of ideology, profits are going to be spread equally among the workers. But I always like to give this kind of example. Some of the people say that socialism prevents people from being innovative or being motivated or competitive. How many of you guys ever did a group project where, maybe there's 4 in the group, and everybody out of the group, 3 of you guys do all the work, and one person kind of just skates by, but you all get the same grade? I guess that's probably a real elementary way to, address the disadvantage that socialism might have. What do you guys think? How would you view socialism here in the United States? Should we embrace it more, or should we just keep things are how they are, or should we maybe take things out of the system that might be considered socialism? What do you guys think? I've been talking. Let me hear you guys. Yeah, I think, there's definitely a movement to embrace more. And I could probably agree with that. I think as long as we don't hamper innovation and maybe, make it so people can be motivated instead of just, skating by. And I really like Beatrice's Canada comment because, Canada is one of those countries that has a lot of government intervention into it, especially with the healthcare. And I think, I would consider myself to be, a little bit of a libertarian, but one of the things I do agree with is I think we should have some aspects of universal healthcare, right? I don't think anybody should go bankrupt just because they have some life-threatening illness. And, like I said, I mentioned earlier, I worked in the healthcare system before, and it's a lot of people say, okay, well, if you exercise, you work out, you eat the right foods, you're going to be okay. But that's not necessarily true, because sometimes the healthiest people will, maybe there might be some type of defect they have, or some type of genetics that, as far as, I in my family, I have to be careful with what I eat and what I put into my body, because my family has a history of heart trouble, right? But I mean, if you have like maybe a genetic defect that happens, I don't think that's cool to, maybe have somebody that can't get treated because they don't have health insurance, or and it's a lot more complicated than what I'm getting into now with some of these health insurance companies. But just kind of to put it at a real basic belief, I mean, if I had to embrace one thing about socialism, it would be that, we have to have some type of universal health care. And I like the option where you can either go on some type of universal healthcare plan, or maybe, buy your own insurance if you want that. And especially with the COVID-19 stuff, I mean, these pharmaceutical companies make so much money. And, there's the race now to decide, to figure out who's going to be able to get the COVID-19 vaccine. And when that company or that corporation or whoever finds that vaccine, they are going to make a lot of money. And in some instances, they're going to be able to set the price that they want. Especially with the questions about how, should there be a limit on the price of prescription medicines? I have to take I got really bad allergies, so if you ever see me on screen, sometimes my eyes are watery or red, and I'm sniffling. That's my allergies, as pollen and stuff like that. So one time I had to go pick up a prescription for like some high strength Benadryl, and if you ever have insomnia, that's the best thing to take too. And there was a lady who was picking up her medication, and I think it was insulin, and even though we're not supposed to listen, they were speaking loudly, and she couldn't afford the insulin. So I mean, that's a really bad thing. That's just my own personal spiel about that. Any comments, questions, or concerns?
Insulin is one of the biggest things that people can't afford in the healthcare system, and it's really sad to see a lot of people come in with diabetic ketoacidosis. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but just high insulin, high glucose levels and stuff. It's just really sad to see when people can't afford their medications.
Yeah, and even if it's some type of basic maintenance medication like that, It's a really concerning thing. I mean, fortunately, I don't know if you could totally trust it, but I wouldn't definitely do it right now. Is, we have a close proximity to Mexico. Some of these pharmaceutical companies will sell things there, and it's a lot cheaper. Kind of taking out the danger of going down to Mexico right now, and some of the closures that are happening. But it's strange that, conceivably I can go across the border and get medications for like half the price, but it's kind of strange that I don't know if you could truly trust that medication. But then, can you trust the medication here? It's one of those, kind of those catch-22s that we have. Okay, good job, guys. We talked a lot about socialism. Now let's go to classical conservatism again. This is kind of the thing that we have now, where, much like the modern conservatism now, it focuses on order and tradition. We also have modern liberalism, which is, kind of what we have now, here in the U.S., where it's the dominant version of socialism, where, there's an idea on emphasis of civil liberty and equality with support for social justice and a mixed economy. When I say a mixed economy, I'm talking about where there's government intervention in the economy, right? There's really no country that has a total free market system. And when you think about it, we have a system of government where our economy is kind of has rules and regulations attached to it. If you had a free market, a total free market economy, you wouldn't be able to do that. There'd be no government regulation, and the economy's guided by the invisible hand, which Adam Smith talked about, and I think we touched on briefly last week. It focuses on individual and equality. So one thing that we need to kind of realize is that we do need government intervention in the economy. And I think I mentioned this in the lecture video. What are two ways that you think we need government intervention in the economy? One way is that we need a way to protect our workers, right? So we have laws that, protect workers' safety. So the government intervenes on that. Another thing that we have is government intervention to protect. Yeah, right. The Beatrice really just took the thought out of my mind. Product safety, right? We have consumer laws. If we go out and buy a car, or maybe even a PlayStation or a computer or some type of high-priced item, we want to be able to bring it home and it work, right? So, the government needs to be involved in that, and we have regulations that, put into not just, to protect this consumer's pocketbook, but also to protect the consumer when they are maybe buying a car. So, we have airbag requirements now, or seat belts, just basic stuff like that. So I think it's good to have government intervention on some of these things, because I think, you like to think corporations and companies are doing stuff to help people, but more or less they just, do stuff to help increase their profits. A good example of modern liberalism is FDR's New Deal. We'll get into that a little bit more, where there are a lot of programs put into place to kind of generate the economy after the Great Depression, where we saw the government grow. And FDR putting into place a lot of things like Social Security, unemployment, that really kind of expanded the government and, kind of use that motivation the government should be in for helping people. And if we would talk about modern liberalism today, it would usually be somebody that's pro-choice, pro-same-sex marriage, pro-social justice. And if you want to see anything, examples of pro-social justice, obviously the George Floyd protests are a good example of that. I really, really cringed today, and I mean, I'm kind of giggling out of I can't believe this guy said that. Not that I think it's funny, but a council person in Scottsdale, Arizona was giving a talk today, and a lot of these people are talking about they don't want to wear masks, and wearing masks are a violation of our civil rights and stuff like that. And this guy goes up in front of everybody and rips off his mask and yells, "I can't breathe." Palm went to my forehead. I was thinking, guy, if you feel that way, just keep that comment to yourself. It's just one of those things that, I mean, I'm not laughing that I think it's funny. I'm giggling because I think it's still totally ridiculous that he said that. We also have something called neoliberalism, and this is, kind of a form of liberalism when we try to, maybe deregulate some of the markets here. And when we talk about deregulation, maybe take off some of the rules that are there, whether it's pollution or safety or whatever. Also, kind of the privatization of government programs. There was talk during the George W. Bush administration that they wanted to privatize Social Security and give us the ability to invest our own Social Security funds. I'm not quite sure that might be the best thing to do, especially when, me, a community college professor, I don't know anything about the stock market. So I want my money to be invested by somebody that in Social Security, that somebody knows what they're doing, and that money is going to be there when I turn 65 in 40 years. I'm just kidding. Free trade. This was a thing that was established by the Clinton administration. We'll get back to talking about that when we focus on Bill Clinton's presidency, which will be probably, maybe the second week of July, which is always interesting when we'll talk about some of the things that he accomplished and some of the problems that he had. Then we have modern conservatism, and this is kind of the right that we have now, where we have the pillars of, the belief in the right to life, liberty, and property, and, kind of maintaining a traditional set of values, tradition and order. Trump's been talking about law and order if you follow his Twitter account, and that goes up to the rule of law. And the rule of law, I don't want to sound like the United States is a bastion for, I want to put this, a discriminatory court system. I do think it is a problem that we have, but I think we still have the best legal system here in the U.S. In the world. Is it corruptible? Yes. Are there problems with it? Yes. But we're innocent until proven guilty. We have a right to trial. We have a right to confront witnesses, and not just that. If we have a disagreement with somebody civilly, we could always sue them. So, we do have a rule of law here where we need to follow the law, but in a sense, it is a system that does need work. And the fourth pillar is a belief in God, even though, you're kind of, when you put that pillar up, you're eliminating 25% of the population. About 25% of the population is either agnostic or atheist. I think that, that speaks for itself. Nico asked a question about neoconservatism and modern conservatism. We'll look at neoconservatism when we look at the George W. Bush administration. Neoconservatism is basically the same thing as modern conservatism, but to add to that is the belief that you should spread democracy throughout the world. And should we be the world police? And that's kind of the whole lookout with neoconservatism. And we're going to really open a can of worms when we talk about things like Iraq and Afghanistan when we get to that portion. Any questions so far? Yeah, I like the use of the word hawks. That Armand used, people that are war hawks that like to profit off of war, stuff like that. Libertarianism. Now, I put up the link for libertarianism. I want you guys to take some time on your own and look at that. I don't want to do it right now because that we're really going to go through a rabbit hole with that. So I want you guys to go ahead and take a look at their views on abortion, look at their views on the death penalty, and also look on their views about a health market system. They're very, very different. And like I said, the libertarian ideology will be socially liberal and economically conservative. I agree with a lot of their party platforms. The only thing I don't agree with is they believe in a free market health system. I don't necessarily believe in that. But again, that's when I say that we pick and choose from our ideologies. You know, you could take things from the left, you could take things from the right, and form your own ideology. And I think that's what a lot of people are doing now. Like, you know, I don't care if a same-sex couple wants to adopt a child. That's none of my business. And in a sense, they might be, you know, in some instances, you know, what's to say they're not going to be, they're going to be worse parents than some of these hetero couples that are out there. But then again, I get concerned with the size of the national debt. So you can see that, you know, one socially liberal thought versus an economically conservative thought. And that's basically what I think the libertarian platform really focuses on. What do you guys think? And then lastly, we have fascism. These are the reactionary groups on the right, Ku Klux Klan, the Taliban, the Nazis. These are all forms of, you know, fascism, where, you know, dictatorship, suppression of your opposition, and basically a strong sense of nationalism. Okay, what we'll do next is we're going to go over what will be on the quiz. Let me bring up the study guide. Okay, so the second quiz is going to be very much like what the first quiz was. And, you know, 25 questions, 60 minutes to do. We talked about federalism in one of the lecture videos. Know what a sub-elite is? Usually a sub-elite is a person that's not a member of the federal government but has power at the local and the state level. People usually trust local and state governments more than federal government. There are about 86,000 different types of government here in the U.S. And a lot of them are going to be on the local level. Obviously, we have the federal government and the state government. But on your local level, there's going to be things like, you know, school boards, water boards.
Who did you say that people trust more?
The local government.
The local government?
Yeah. And a lot of people, they'll trust the local government more because, you know, it's easier to access them. I mean, if you want to go to a city council meeting, you can go and talk at a city council meeting and ask questions. It might be a little bit harder to do it at Congress.
Yeah,
go
that
ahead.
makes sense.
Yeah, go ahead, Armand. You have your hand up. I can't really, I'm trying to find the chat. Hold on. I lost the chat. Okay, go ahead, Armand. You had a question? Okay, let's go ahead and get back to this. Okay, know the 10th Amendment. I talked a little bit about the 10th Amendment in one of the videos. Remember, the 10th Amendment basically gives states the rights to engage in any type of action as long as it doesn't encroach on Congress's powers or violates any type of constitutional privileges that we have. And I think the easiest thing to talk about when we talk about the 10th Amendment is just think about the marijuana law here in the United States and in California. California, obviously, marijuana is legal for recreational use, but it's still illegal at the federal level. Know the 14th Amendment, we all have equal protection, and the government's required that the states provide equal protection to everybody, equal protection under the law. Know what cooperative federalism is, or marble cake federalism? That's where federalism was mixed between the federal government and the state governments, where they shared powers. Know what dual federalism is? We talked a little bit about that, where you have two separate entities or separate governments responsible for different types of powers. Where in the first 100 years of our country, we had the federal government just focusing on national defense, and the state governments focusing on individual states' rights. Any questions about that? Sorry, I have to close the window to see if there's anybody in the chat asking questions. It's a little glitchy thing here in Canvas. Okay, so basically also know what mandates are in federal mandates. There's going to be questions about the ideology that we just talked about, so remember those. The left, the right, reactionary, libertarianism. Know what the Bessemer process was. It was something in the 1900s lecture where the Bessemer project made a lot of people a lot of money, where you're converting or making steel. Go ahead, Armand, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment. Can you hear my, is the audio on?
Yeah, your audio is good.
Yes. I just wanted to comment that, there are, it's pretty interesting to see the differences in these ideologies. And within, the Republican Party, I feel like there's a limit on the ideologies, because, there's neoconservatives, and there's paleoconservatives, and then there's libertarians. The libertarians are economically to the right, they're liberal, they believe, but they're more, but on social issues they're more liberal, and and on foreign policy the libertarians are generally more dovish than the neoconservatives, but the neoconservatives are more moderate on domestic policy,
right?
But they're more hawkish on foreign policy. They don't believe they believe in strike first instead of diplomacy, whereas most Democrats and social liberals believe in diplomacy first.
Right. Armand, I couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
You made a really good distinction. And one thing that we look at with some of these ideologies, there's factions within it, like you just mentioned. On the left, you have the very progressive, Bernie Sanders, AOC type thought. You on the right, you have anything from a moderate Republican, maybe like Mitt Romney, all the way to a far right person like Rand Paul.
Rand Paul is economically pretty far to the right, but on foreign policy he's pretty dovish.
Yeah.
And the paleoconservatives are the traditional conservatives, like Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri. They are socially conservative, and they're also economically kind of moderate. But I'm really concerned about the future of the Republican Party after Trump. The Democrats currently are divided between the progressives and the moderates, but they are but it often seems like the Republican Party is united in its support for corporate interests, but ideologically they're pretty different, and they're just united. But the Democrats have been trying to unify, and they're separating between the moderates and the progressives, and oftentimes, and so I'm really concerned about the direction of the parties, like, because with Trump there's been a shifting of white working class people more to the Republican Party, and then more suburban people are going to Democrats. So I don't know how the November election is going to go. Like, it could honestly go either way. So
Oh yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you, what do you think is the future direction? Like, do you think the Democrats are going to have more success going forward, or what in your opinion, what is the composition of the future Republican Party?
I think the Republican Party is being dragged a little bit too much to the right.
Exactly, yeah.
And obviously the Democratic Party, I think with the younger generation, maybe people that are 18, 19, 20 right now, if they still stay with some of their ideologies, their feelings on progressivism, I think that's going to pull the Democratic Party farther to the left. And I think maybe I don't know what's going to happen in November. If you had asked me to bet my house right now on who would win, I would go with Trump. Just because the Democrats don't really have... I mean, Biden is what Biden is, right?
Yeah, Biden is very weak. Like,
yeah. Older gentleman has, maybe some... what happens to older people, some cognitive decline, but so does Trump.
Yeah. I mean, Biden currently is in a stronger position than Hillary Clinton. I mean, Biden currently is leading so much in the polls right now. I mean, a recent poll by Wisconsin showing leading by 8%, but then again, with Hillary Clinton, the polls are showing she would win.
Yeah.
But Biden is way more popular than Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
Like, people have a higher opinion of Biden than they did with Hillary Clinton. Whereas back in 2016, they had a negative opinion of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. Now they see Joe Biden as a little bit better. And in the primaries, Biden crushed Bernie. Like, in Michigan, he did pretty good among white working class suburban people. And one major factor was South Carolina. Like, the African American voters, the older African American voters, propelled Biden to victory. So I'm really concerned. But when it comes to general election, I'm worried that the Democrats are in the short term choosing a candidate who they see as electable. But
exactly.
Ultimately, I'm worried that he'll suffer the same fate as John Kerry, especially if we have an economic recovery. Because if there's no economic recovery and the political situation is what it is today, as of now, Biden has the upper hand. But if things improve, Biden, like Trump could definitely win re-election. In fact, if things go so good, he could win by an even bigger margin than he did in 2016. So it could honestly go either way. I mean, Reagan, in his first term, like, the economy was kind of in a recession, but then he pulled out of the recession. He beat Walter Mondale, but one of the biggest landslides ever.
He spanked him.
Like, Walter Mondale, like, he only won one state, Minnesota, and also DC. So it's and Richard Nixon in 1972 beat George McGovern by such a large margin. So I don't think we're gonna see any of these types of elections like in modern times. Like, but I'm really concerned about the future of both political parties. I'm worried that the Democratic Party would be shifted too far to the left and the Republican Party shifted too far to the right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I feel like we need somewhat of a leftward shift in the spectrum of acceptable debate, because oftentimes it has been the Democrats that are the centrists and the Republicans that are the far right. So when you combine those two together, ultimately you get legislation that is center right.
Yeah.
And that has been the de facto situation for the past 50 years. And if we want to compete with the rest of the world in terms of education, in terms of healthcare, in terms of economic opportunity for everyone, we need to make sure we pursue policies which benefit everyone, not just the very top 1%. So I do believe in a shift leftwards, but I cannot stand the Green Party people who just want to separate the progressives from the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Because so ultimately we have to see what the ideological trends are going forward.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
yeah.
let's hold this conversation
I know,
off to
sorry.
when
Yeah.
we go to into talking about elections. I definitely we'll get back to this when we go into chapter 6 of the Irony book, because I think it makes some really good points, and we'll talk about the electoral college, and we'll talk about electability and stuff like that. So very good stuff.
Right.
We'll hold that off.
Yeah,
for
sorry
a
if it
couple
took
of
a
days.
bit long.
Oh no, it's cool.
But, yeah.
I mean, I like that better than no one saying anything. But yeah, some good points. Okay, so let's get back. So we talked a little bit about progressivism, the progressive movement, the Teddy Roosevelt movement. So know about some of the laws as far as, the Pure Meat and Food Act and the different types of things that were put into place to protect the consumer and to protect the people. Know Roosevelt's square deal and some of the things with that. And I think Nico did make a good point about publicly funded elections, and we'll get to that. I promise we'll talk about that. Know what social Darwinism is, that whole survival of the fittest. Don't worry about the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine and the Platt Amendment. Don't worry about those guys. We went over it, but there's not going to be any really questions about that on the exam. So look at federalism. Look at the ideology section that we just talked about, and know that some of the things that come out with ideologies. There's gonna be about 5 questions about ideologies, so make sure you know all that. Any questions, concerns, or comments? You guys have been doing great. I'm really happy with the progress. I was a little bit kind of concerned with when I got this thing, trying to cram a 16-week class or a 17-week class into 6 weeks, but it looks like you guys are doing okay, and we're coming up at the end of our hour right now. Any questions before I let you guys get out of here? I'll post this to YouTube. Real quick, the YouTube video's been working out. I know they're like rudimentary and elementary. I'm not really the best at it, but are they helping? Can you let me know in the chat or
They're helping me.
I really like them on YouTube because it has the transcript, and I like to take that from what you say compared to the PowerPoint. So instead of like playing it back, I can just look at the transcript.
Perfect. And I'm still working on it. I'm still working on my quality. So I know it's rudimentary, but hey, I'm not these guys that I'm not one of these guys that makes millions of dollars on YouTube by posting food.
Oh, these sessions have been super helpful for me too. I feel like I'm following along really well with all the material.
Okay, perfect. And I really appreciate you guys. You guys have a lot of good discussions. Remember, I don't usually post in your discussion posts. I don't want to guide the discussion, but I definitely give you feedback and let you know what I think when I grade them. So you won't see me too often posting in the discussions because I don't want to take the class to a point that I want them to go, if that makes sense. I want you guys to be able to express your thought without trying to please me. I guess that's the best thing to put that. Any questions?
So what was the last thing you said about to know about the Roosevelt?
Don't worry about the Roosevelt corollary.
Before
on the
that,
study guide. Just focus on the square deal and
the square deal. There we go.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, guys, we're up now. We're up on our hour, so it usually takes me about a day to get these things uploaded. I'm having some problem communicating with my recording mechanism to YouTube, so sometimes it takes a while to upload. What is it? Like and subscribe to my channel. I'm just kidding. But that's all I got for tonight. We'll definitely do this next Wednesday again, and we're going to start talking a little bit more about kind of the bones and the gist of elections and stuff like that. Any questions?
Yes, thank you.
Concerns or comments? All right, guys, I'll be on here for a couple of minutes after you guys all get off. If you have any questions for me specifically. All right, have a good evening.
You too. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. Good evening. It's a pretty interesting discussion.
Yeah, we'll have more of them. Definitely.
Thank you very much.
I love these discussions, so we'll have more of them.
Yeah, I love them too.
Yeah. All right, guys, have a good night. I'll be on here for a couple of minutes if you guys have any other questions.
Thank you.